Okay, picture this for a second. There's a speaker standing at the front of a crowded room, but instead of looking at the audience, he is completely monotone, staring fixedly at a bell rope at the very back of the church. I mean, it doesn't exactly sound like the recipe for sparking a massive, explosive cultural revolution, right? But as we're going to see today, history is absolutely full of fascinating paradoxes.
Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us. Today, we have a genuinely incredible historical biography to unpack. We are focusing on one of the most intellectually gifted, influential figures in American history, Jonathan Edwards, and the absolute wildfire of a movement he helped ignite, the First Great Awakening. So let's dive right in. Here is our quick roadmap for today's journey. First, a colonial crisis of faith. Second, mapping the colonial churches. Third, the prodigy, Jonathan Edwards. Fourth, the First Great Awakening. Fifth, exile to the wilderness. And finally, number 6, tragedy and lasting legacy.
Section 1. A colonial crisis of faith. The decline of the immigrant churches. So, by the time we hit the 18th century, the second, third, and fourth generations of settlers in America were facing a really massive crisis. Basically, they were losing their original religious fervor. But, why exactly was that happening? Well, there were 4 distinct, really serious threats causing a steep decline in colonial church vitality. First off, the members themselves just didn't have that same intense, burning fervor as the original immigrants did. It had cooled off. Second, you had this rise in dissidence, basically people staying within the church but just arguing constantly over theology and governance. Third, the massive, undeniable impact of the Age of Reason. And fourth, for the very first time, they were facing external antagonism from atheists and agnostics outside the church who were openly, vocally questioning organized religion.
Let's actually zero in on that third point for a second, the Age of Reason. This era popularized deism. Now, deism wasn't a formal denomination. It was more of a philosophical view. Think of it as a clockmaker god. The idea is that a deity built the world, wound it up like a giant clock, and then totally stepped back, having absolutely no active connection to humanity whatsoever. This highly rationalistic approach severely threatened the traditional teachings of those immigrant churches.
Section 2. Mapping the colonial churches, where everyone worshipped. Let's take a step back and look at the actual geographical landscape of religion in the colonies right before this massive cultural revolution hit. If we break down where everyone was worshiping, the Congregationalists were almost exclusively up in New England. Anglicans and Baptists, they were spread out all over the place. But get this, look at the Roman Catholics. Today, we might naturally associate heavy Catholic populations with a place like Boston, right? But back then, the Catholic population was actually quite small and heavily concentrated in the middle colonies, like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Quakers and Lutherans also found their primary homes right there in the middle colonies. Section 3. The prodigy, Jonathan Edwards, enter the catalyst. So right into this declining, totally fractured religious landscape steps our catalyst. Born in Connecticut in 1703, Jonathan Edwards stood out as this exceptionally brilliant American-born mind who was ready to face this crisis head-on. And I mean brilliant. Edwards hit some truly astonishing early milestones. By the time he was just 13 years old, he was already fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Insane, right? And before he even turned 13, he entered Yale University. Oh, and here's a fun little piece of trivia for you. Yale wasn't actually in New Haven back then. It originally started in Wethersfield, Connecticut. By 17, Edwards had already graduated. He was a genuine prodigy with a profound interest in the natural sciences, and he possessed these incredible razor-sharp powers of observation. So the absolutely crucial point here is what he actually did with that massive intellect. Let's contrast his core beliefs. Edwards strongly argued for a return to Calvinistic theology, specifically the idea of predestination, which had honestly kind of died out culturally. He also firmly believed that the laws of nature, science itself, were derived directly from God, showcasing his infinite wisdom. On the flip side, he argued fiercely against Arminianism, which put all the stress on human free will, and he totally pushed back against that growing tide of deism and rationalism we talked about earlier. And to fuel this unbelievable intellectual output, he had a staggering daily routine. 13, that is the exact number of hours Jonathan Edwards spent studying every single day. This grueling, rigorous discipline and deep, deep immersion in Scripture is exactly what prepared him to be the spark for a massive, continent-wide revival.
Now, to fully understand the history, we really have to look at the factual context of his life as well. As noted in our source material, Jonathan Edwards was very much a man of his time, and he did own slaves. Historical biographers note that he treated them carefully, essentially as employees, but the fact remains he did purchase and own them. This places him squarely within the highly complex, deeply rooted, and troubling culture of 18th century colonial America.
Section 4, The First Great Awakening, an explosive revival. So despite his heavy academic focus, you have to understand Edwards wasn't just a brain in a jar. He possessed a profound, intensely personal devotion that would end up triggering this massive historical movement. Just listen to the intensity in this quote from his personal narrative. Back in 1723, he wrote, "I made a solemn dedication of myself to God, giving up myself and all that I had to God, to act as one that had no right to himself in any respect." Wow. I mean, that really shows you the deep, passionate devotion that was driving this highly intellectual scholar behind the scenes. Fast forward to 1727. Edwards moves to Northampton, Massachusetts, to assist his grandfather, Solomon Stoddard. And Stoddard was an incredibly important, super powerful pastor in his own right. So when Stoddard passed away in 1729, Jonathan Edwards stepped up and took over the pastoral ministry of that church, completely setting the stage for what was about to happen. Now, remember that hook from the very beginning of our explainer? Edwards' preaching style was surprisingly dry. I mean, he literally read verse by verse, totally monotone, just staring at the bill rope at the back of the church. He was the exact polar opposite of another very famous figure of the Awakening, George Whitefield, who was highly dynamic and theatrical. But, as the old saying goes, God's truth comes through personality. Edwards stayed completely true to his own quiet, scholarly personality, and yet the cultural results were absolutely explosive. The result of that unique preaching came to a massive head in 1734. This is the year most historians generally recognize as the official start of the First Great Awakening. Hundreds of people were converting. It was wild. Edwards then popularized this immense revival worldwide by publishing a book in 1737 called A Faithful Narrative, which actually spread the news of this phenomenon all the way across the ocean to Europe. Section 5, Exile to the Wilderness, a dramatic fall from grace. But as we know, history is rarely just a straight line upwards. Let's shift our narrative arc to Edwards' lowest point. His absolute peak was quickly followed by a dramatic fall, and it was triggered by a massive theological dispute with his very own congregation. The whole dispute boiled down to one highly contentious question that was literally tearing New England churches apart at the time: who actually gets to be a church member? This brings us to the famous halfway covenant controversy. See, Edward's grandfather believed baptism and communion could be offered to non-believers, kind of hoping the sheer exposure might eventually convert them. Edwards? He strongly disagreed. He demanded strict Puritan purity. He firmly believed that only true believers with a clear, proven profession of faith could participate. His congregation was so utterly opposed to his strict views that in 1750, they actually fired him. No way, right? They fired the guy who started the Great Awakening? Section 6, Tragedy and Lasting Legacy, the Edwardsians. Seriously, imagine leading a global, historic revival only to be thrown out onto the street by your own church. This completely shocking turn of events sent Edwards into a literal wilderness exile in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. After his dismissal in 1750, Edwards went out to the frontier of Stockbridge to minister to Native Americans. But ironically, this quiet exile gave him the time to write his absolute greatest theological masterpieces, defending predestination. His brilliance just couldn't be hidden away forever, and in 1758 he was named president of Princeton University. But right as he reached the very pinnacle of American academia, tragedy struck. He took an early smallpox vaccination to protect himself, but he ended up dying from it just 3 months into his presidency. Talk about a tragic twist of fate. But of course, his immense influence didn't die with him. He had a dedicated group of followers known as the Edwardsians, which even included his own son. But here is the ultimate historical irony for you. While they proudly carried his name, these direct theological descendants paradoxically rejected his core teachings on predestination. They actually ended up embracing the exact free will theology that Edwards spent his entire life fighting against. It's such a classic tale of the next generation completely missing the founder's original point. We are going to leave things right here today with Edwards' absolute greatest legacy.
He proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that we do not have to choose between a life of the mind and a life of the heart. He's somehow perfectly balanced, towering, unmatched intellect and scientific observation with deeply passionate emotional devotion. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. In our modern, highly polarized world, do you feel forced to choose between logic and emotion? Or can you, just like Edwards did centuries ago, find a way to brilliantly balance both? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.